there's something I wanted to share. There's something I wanted to get off my heart, and I didn't actually prep Dr. Rod with this because I kind of wanted this to be a surprise because I want to talk authentically about this, and I actually want him to go into his normal advice mode like he does when he and I talk on the phone. And I just want to pour out. I want to talk about purpose. Purpose is very, very important to me, well, to everyone. Look, let's be honest. Everyone's purpose should be important to them. But it's a core part of how I have always operated my life. It's a core part of how we operate our business, a core part of how we operate our leadership program. We spend our first 10 weeks of our free leadership program. Yeah, shameless plug. Check out the link below. Free leadership program. You spend the first 10 weeks focusing on you understanding your purpose as a leader. And then everything else is really how you help others discover their purpose as leaders. And you'll notice a lot of our conversations tend to lead back or turn back to purpose and our purpose as a leader, because I believe that that's kind of the core of what causes poor leadership. Now, remember, I say poor leadership, I'm not talking about poor leaders, because there's some great leaders out there that are displaying poor leadership. And so it's really important that we separate the two. Now, we need to understand what our purpose is. And one thing that I have been personally battling with over the last, well, I mean, we've been doing this podcast now for, well, what, we're in our 23rd week now. So, yeah, we've been doing it for 6 months. I've been trying to battle, are we representing the right thing? And one thing that's really been coming to mind lately is I obviously see a lot of people in YouTube and a lot of influencers that their channels are dedicated to really ripping apart bad theology, bad church leaders, and all that sort of stuff. And I must admit, I got caught up in it a little bit in the last couple of weeks, and I thought maybe it is our job, because I mean, a mission that I believe that God gave me was to eradicate poor leadership. And like I said, it's the behavior, not the person. And so I'm thinking maybe we meant to be going a little bit harder at the poor leaders, or at the poor leadership that we're talking about, and maybe go directly to the people. Because what we tend to do is we tend to try to separate the behavior from the person, because I believe that's what we're called to do. But also just look at that event as a metaphor of how we can be better leaders ourselves. And so in doing that, we don't go hard on attacking or trying to correct the person or the actual behavior of that person. We're kind of very separate. And there was a comment that was put on one of our videos. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the comments on our videos tend to be, let's just say, keyboard warriors. People that are just, I don't know whether you've noticed this, and it's really surprised me. There's some negative people on the internet, and some negative people with some strong opinions. And usually when they put comments, all what they're doing is displaying their stupidity, because a lot of their negative comments are actually negated by, if they actually watched our entire video or even watched the entire podcast or whatever, their question would be answered, or their challenge would be answered anyway. But there was one comment recently that kind of stuck with me in a positive way. Now, I've actually kind of avoided really getting into the comments and replying to them, because, as I say, if you argue with a stupid person, it makes two. Right. And so I've kind of avoided that, and I've kind of avoided just getting into it myself. And so, hey, look, if you want to leave positive comments, I'd love to see those coming through. Let's flood the comments with positive comments. Yes. But there was a comment that I noticed that stuck with me, and I was surprised at my positive response to it. Someone put a comment in there saying, "You guys are spin doctors." And I know that I assume that they were meaning it in a negative way, that you're spin doctors, because yes, we're always looking at a situation but we're not actually accusing the person or anything like that. We're trying to figure out how we would react and try to interpret what we would do and try to take that sense on it. And I suppose in that respect, we are spin doctors. And I would actually say that what was obviously meant to be an insult is kind of what I would see as my purpose, as my gift, as my calling in life is I've always been able to see a situation and turn it into a metaphor that I can learn and then teach from. Part of my gifting and Dr. Rod's teaching is with giftings is with teachers. And so I've always been able to just see everyday events and be able to spin them into a lesson. And so, whoever made that comment that we're spin doctors, thank you. Yes, we are spin doctors. We spin a bad situation and try to figure out how we can learn and bring a lesson for us as leaders. Our purpose, our calling is not to be one of those channels that pulls people down. Us in. Let me talk to you for a second, Dr. Rod. What's the go with we as a church now? I'm battling because yes, I believe that we need to call out bad behavior. I agree with that, right? We have to call out bad behavior. But I also believe we need to stand united as a church. How do we do those two things?
What, you're asking me? I thought you were going to tell us. I thought you were going to tell us. Look, well, the Bible actually says we are to prefer one another. We're to submit to one another. So I think part of the unity story is submitting our own opinions to those of others and not trying, as it were, to rule the roost.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, I guess, is personal decisions that we make about how we relate to others. And as far as I'm concerned on this podcast, unless I know what is true, that as it were, the facts about a situation, I'm very reluctant to criticise any individual and would rather focus on lessons for leadership, which is virtually what you said. Look, I do think that sometimes in the church we can be throwing stones at other people without necessarily realising that we're living in a glass house ourselves. Yeah. So I'm not that interested in using social media to criticise other people. Certainly, we may be able to criticise ideas, and I hope we do that from time to time. We may even be able to criticise what people have said, but I do think we need to be extremely careful about criticising individuals. So, for example, we don't want to put labels on people. That's really not our purpose. I don't go through life trying to do that. I just don't see that's the way that God sees us.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of podcasts these days have a strong political flavour, not necessarily party political, but they do have a strong political flavour. And the philosophies of politics these days are generally to be quite aggressively against people rather than ideas. And I just hope there's room on social media for a podcast like ours where we try to focus on ideas, when we try to focus on what people have said or their actions with a focus on the action or the words rather than the people, because frankly, all of us ought to be criticised at one time or another, but preferably in private by people who do so because they love us and want to see us grow.
Yeah, look, and I kind of take it of and obviously, Dr. Roddy, you've known me, and anyone that goes through our free leadership program will know I'm always talking about past leadership experiences that were negative, but I speak about them in a very positive light because I've learned from it, I've grown from it, and so, and I have empathy for those people. I know that they are great leaders. They were just displaying poor leadership, trying to separate the behavior from the person. And also I mentioned this is like, I don't want to speak negatively about their ministry, about their business, about their calling, because they have great missions, they have great purposes to fulfill themselves. Yes, they may not be doing it in the best way, but who am I to get in the way of something that what God is trying to do, right? He's trying to do it in partnership with failed humans, and we all may make mistakes. And so I suppose I take that same attitude as I would talk about my past experiences as I do in talking about these. Is even with those past experiences, even though I was in the situation, I still don't know the whole story. I don't know what was going in my business partner's mind, or my senior pastor's mind, or in my client's mind, or my, whoever it was. I don't know what was really going on in their minds and in their lives outside of. I can only assume and try to gather as much information, but we never know. And so, especially from such a distance from these news topics that we're talking about, we don't know. Also, I'm not a news reporter. I don't research, right? So I I don't like I do a bit of research on this and try to find different articles and try to get many different views from it as possible. But I'm not a news reporter, so I'm not gathering all of the facts. All what I see is, while I see a news article, if something jumps out at me, I'm like, oh, there's a good lesson in that. That's what I'm doing, and that's all I want from you to be able to gain from this stuff as well. Not necessarily that we're trying to pull these people down, or even trying to celebrate them and put them up on a pedestal or anything like that. It's just like, here's a lesson for us to learn. I learn it. I just want to share it with you. And so, yeah, look. Yes, we are spin doctors. We should all be spin doctors. Just learning from situations. Let's not be, you know, and going back to purpose. I know it's not my purpose to call out those people and to step, because I'm not, once again, I'm not researched enough. I can't spend enough time research. That's just not me. And I'm not that sort of a person. There are some people that is their purpose, and you see them on YouTube, and that's their calling. Good on them. But once again, I will admit fault. I got wrapped up into somewhat, like, I saw a lot of negative reports about Mike Todd and his recent stuff on his Easter stuff, and they're pulling out some of his, his things. And I must admit, I got caught up in that. We spoke about how the Transformation Church and Mike Todd's church have taken on Carl Lentz, and now, like, how iffy that is. And I must admit that I personally was starting to have a negative thought process towards Michael Todd. I'd see something and I'd be like, oh yeah, that evil guy, or like, and I'm just like, hold on a second. I should not be thinking about that, because I know that there's other pastors that I follow that people are trying to tear them down, and they pull out like one sentence from what that pastor has said and misconstrue it. Yet I've seen or listened to every single sermon that pastor has preached since they started preaching publicly, and I know that that's not their heart. I know that that's not who they are. And so I corrected myself and went, you know what? If I'm going to have this view about Mike Todd, I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to Mike Todd. I'm going to go and listen to all of his sermons and get a full view of what he preaches and see what he has. And can I tell you, look, I'm no theologian, and are there some things that are might be questionably theologically? Maybe, but I'm no deep theologian. Are his sermons motivational? Yes, they are. They do tend to be on, because that's his style. Is he blunt with some of his corrections from the Bible? Yeah. And I think that's what everyone argues about these motivational speakers, is like, they're not correcting, that they're not preaching the fire and brimstone stuff that, well, actually he does. Now, there's some things that might be questionable, but I will say this. In me listening to Mike Todd, my faith spirit has been ignited again, right? Because he just does these crazy things stepping out in faith. And I had a senior pastor that was like that, and I haven't been around him for a while. And I must admit, I've kind of I realized in listening to him, I'm like, I haven't been stepping out as much in faith. And so whether he's theologically fine or what, like, you know what? My spirit has benefited from it. Now, am I going to take wholeheartedly every single theological thing he says? No. I filter everything through the Holy Spirit. I make sure I study my own Bible. I make sure I listen to many different pastors to make sure I get a broad view. And I have my pastor, Dr. Rod St. Hill, that I speak to and get correction from and make sure that things are sound anyway. So sorry, I have been ranting a little bit. That's something on my heart. But I suppose just to kind of wrap it up, Dr. Rod, how do we, obviously knowing our purpose, right? Our purpose is not to really stand here and picket against those people, but see how we can learn, and hopefully they watch our stuff and can learn from our stuff at some point. But what about those people that their purpose is to call out that stuff? How would you advise someone that they believe that that's their calling? How would you advise them to do that in a way that doesn't disunite the church?
Well, don't start up a website and use that as your main medium for criticism, all right? And one of the things I noticed quite some time ago was that just about every prominent ministry in the United States, you can find 2 or 3 websites that are effectively dedicated to pulling them down. Mm-hmm. So look, I think generally speaking, when correction comes, it comes through face-to-face interactions with other people. And I think that's the best place to start. It always is. Sometimes people will talk about the Matthew 18 principle, which I think actually applies to someone who has sinned. In fact, it's quite specific about that. And you go and see that person in private, and if you don't resolve the issue, you take a couple of others with you, and then ultimately you bring it up before the whole of the congregation in a church situation. I don't think that necessarily should apply when it's just a difference of opinion. We're not necessarily talking about sin, but in general, it's better if you can to just talk face to face. If it's someone you know and love, and they're confident that you're correcting them not only for their own sake, but for the sake of those whom they influence, then I think that's generally the best way to go. I don't know that there's a lot of value in us using social media to criticise someone we hardly know. I just don't think it has any impact at all. Sometimes, of course, criticism can be very hurtful, especially when it's unjustified. So generally speaking, I doubt that God calls us to tear down other ministries and denominations via social media. I hate to say that, because I think that would cut a lot of people's time short, no doubt. Yeah. But I just don't think it's the appropriate way to do it. I never think it's appropriate to do this kind of thing publicly unless it's a very last resort, and unless the stakes are also very high. So, we've talked about people like Brian Houston and so on, and in the past, and obviously there are so many people attacking them who probably have never actually met them ever in their lives, so they don't know what they're like in face-to-face interactions, and they don't even know what the truth is of the so-called facts that are out there, because they usually gather their facts by harvesting them from social media, and social media is notoriously unreliable.
The media are ridiculously unreliable. Yeah. And they can talk about being spin doctors. They can spin it any way that they can. But okay, that's really good advice. So, I had this thought that if you are one of those YouTube channels, or feel like you're called to challenge bad theology, then challenge the bad theology, not challenge the person, right? Maybe say, hey, I saw someone preach this and maybe even pull that person's face and name. Now, here's the thing. I know that part of it is you're getting clicks. You need to use a face for clicks. That's the reason why we use these metaphors. I'll use it straight up because I'm going to talk about Giannis in the Milwaukee Bucks, and hopefully there's some people who are interested in him that'll then find us, that'll then learn some leadership stuff as well. Yes, I get that. I understand that you're going for clicks, but what are you trying to do? Because you're going to have to be answerable to the king as well, right? About how you approach things and how you've shepherded your flock. And so maybe there's a way that you can do it without attacking the person, but bring up, oh, look, there was this, they said, their stuff is generally pretty good, but this statement was a little questionable. And let's look into that and let's exegete that completely, right? Like do that. That's fine. But once again, like I said before, we call poor leadership the behavior, not the person. And so maybe if you're called out, if you believe you're called to speak against bad theology or what poor leadership or anything like that, let's separate the person from the act and look at it individually, because we don't know the whole story. Hey, that was an excerpt from our On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, put a comment below. And if you want to see more content like this, faith-based leadership development content, make sure you check out our channel, give it a subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you'll be notified when we release new content.